Today, we're putting these two cameras up against each other, the Fuji X100VI and the iPhone 16 Pro. As someone who wants to travel as light as possible, but also wants the highest quality photos, I want to make sure I bring the right camera on a trip. If my iPhone can compete with my Fuji, I may just leave the Fuji at home. So one of these photos was taken on the iPhone 16 Pro and the other on the Fuji X100VI. Can you tell the difference? So right off the bat, looking at these photos, I think they look really similar. A large part of that is likely because I tried to get the same framing for both of these cameras. So let's look a little closer. The first thing that I noticed that's different between these two photos is the shades of blue. On the Fuji, in my opinion, is a more pleasing shade of blue. And on the iPhone, it looks like your typical smartphone shade of blue. I could go in later to edit the blues of the iPhone photos, but I'm looking for a solution for not editing my vacation photos, so we're just gonna look at these as they are. If we look a little bit closer, the iPhone looks a little more digitally sharpened, whereas the photo from the Fuji looks a little softer and less digital. So all the photos that are taken on the Fuji X100VI are using Kodak Gold, and I think I got that film recipe on Fuji X Weekly. And if it wasn't that one, it was something really close to that. And to make these film recipes, essentially you just change settings in the camera. You can change the white balance, you can change the sharpness, the amount of grain, or the amount of contrast in your images, pretty much everything, so that you can get the photos coming straight out of your camera to look like film. It's a very popular thing. That's why these Fuji cameras have been very tough to get your hands on, or just really expensive. And all the photos taken on the iPhone are taken using the new iPhone 16 Pro photographic styles. This is new for the iPhone 16 Pro lineup this year. By adding these photographic styles, you're changing the undertones and the filters and the colors that are coming through on these images. And you can shoot these straight to your photos, no editing required later. I believe for all of these, I shot them all in amber and adjusted the tone and the color. However, because I shot these in HEIF and they didn't match the Fuji images as closely as I'd liked, I actually switched it to gold and applied that to all of the photos. In this next photo, I think it's even easier to see the difference between the blues and even the colors that are put into the highlights. And on the iPhone, a little warmer, and on the Fuji camera, it's a little cooler. Now, is one of these right or wrong? I don't think so. I like the way the photos from the Fuji come out, so my goal is to try and make these look as close as possible and see if I can replace my Fuji with my iPhone when traveling. To get the photos from these two cameras as close as I could as possible, I removed the filter that I usually shoot with on the Fuji, and that's the Short Stash Polar Pro filter. It's a polarizer and a bloom filter all in one. The iPhone doesn't have that, so I got rid of that. And on the iPhone, I made sure to shoot on the 35mm lens. Oh, also on the side of this photo, we can see that the brighter parts have started to blow out on the Fuji camera, and on the iPhone, there's much more dynamic range and that detail is retained. This next example is really interesting. You can see on the Fuji photo, there is definitely some depth of field, and on iPhone, it looks like there's more out of focusness. And like the fall off to the back of the photo on the Fuji looks more natural, and on the iPhone, there's a lot more in focus. Maybe I had this in macro mode or not in this case, I'm not sure. Yeah, stuff's out of focus, but the Fuji looks more natural and more pleasing to me. Here's another example where both photos look really similar. The biggest difference is the shade of yellow. And if you mix these up and didn't tell me which is which, I would not know which one's the iPhone and which one's the Fuji without looking closer. Maybe the amount of highlights that are retained in the iPhone would be the giveaway, but you'd have to zoom in to see that. I think this example is interesting. There's some foreground and there's some background, and the background in both examples are out of focus. I think what gives away the iPhone photo in this example is that the iPhone feels more sharp and in focus, and the skin tone just feels too perfect and over sharpened, whereas the hand on the Fuji looks a little softer and natural, and there seems to be a little bit of fall off of focus as the foreground moves into the background. I'm pretty sure looking at these photos, you can really easily tell which photo came from which camera. The skin tones on the iPhone look like they're coming from an iPhone, and it looks kind of over-processed, a little too sharp. Whereas the photo from the Fuji to me looks far more pleasing, a lot more natural. The skin tone looks a lot nicer. It feels smoother, and not everything is like crisp and clear. It just feels more natural and pleasing to my eye, at least. In terms of focus, the foreground and the background are out of focus on the Fuji, where the iPhone isn't able to optically match that. And the iPhone has also retained more information in the brighter parts, where the Fuji has some things kind of like blow out a little bit more. So after looking at a whole bunch of examples, there are definitely some places that the Fuji excels over the iPhone. The first being that you can shoot RAW and JPEG photos at the same time. In this experiment, I was shooting straight to JPEG so that I could compare these photos, but sometimes I don't like the film recipe that I chose necessarily, and I want to tweak it a little bit more in post. And that's where it's nice to have RAW and JPEG shot of the exact same image at the exact same time. iPhone is not capable of this. iPhone is capable of shooting RAW photos, but you can't shoot a RAW and a JPEG at the same time. And because you are getting RAW photos from the Fuji, you have pretty much unlimited editing options of your final photos after you've shot them. The experience of shooting with a Fuji is actually pretty fun. I find it very nice to be holding a camera in my hands, not necessarily a device that also receives emails and text messages and is your navigation device. When you're holding a device in your hand that is intended to just shoot photos, I find that I get better shots and it's a better shooting experience for me. I also find it's really nice to have a viewfinder to put your eye up to. It feels like you're putting blinders on to the rest of the world. It's just you and the subject that you're shooting. When shooting on the Fuji, everything's going to be optically correct. I don't know if that's the right term, but like if you're shooting at 2.8 and your subject is in focus, the background is going to be correctly out of focus according to 2.8, according to the optics of the lens. Where when you're shooting on the iPhone, I don't know what aperture I'm shooting at, and sometimes stuff is in focus in the background, sometimes it's not. The Fuji has a really nice lens and it shows in the photos that you get. If you're shooting in low light, I think you have more options and flexibility with the Fuji, especially if you have a tripod. You can open the shutter for as long or as short as you want, and you can add more ISO or less ISO. You just have like a lot more control of what your finished image is going to look like over the iPhone, which is going to use its algorithms and math stuff to try and make the photo look as best as possible in camera. Now, I didn't get any photo examples of this, but if you're looking to get photos that are caught with a slower shutter, that are blurry on purpose, or you want some motion blur in something, it's a lot trickier to do this on the iPhone, and I think that's where the Fuji has the upper hand if you're looking to control your shutter speed. That being said, I do think the iPhone has the upper hand over the Fuji in a few ways. The dynamic range on the iPhone is incredible, and the dynamic range is like the difference between the brightest part of your image and the darkest part of your image. The Fuji does a great job, but sometimes when you're exposed for your object, the background blows out, where the iPhone retains the detail in the darkest and the lightest parts of the image almost all of the time. Now, this is a great thing if you're in a tricky situation, but optically, if you're trying to make your phone photos look like film or look more like a digital camera, digital photos do like to clip, and some of the detail in the backgrounds and the highlights, it's okay if they kind of disappear. And so this is where iPhone photos look a little bit more like iPhone photos. They just have like a little bit too much detail in the images. But again, this is personal preference. Holy smokes, where did that light come from? Now, if storage and file size is important to you, the iPhone definitely has the upper hand here. The Fuji X100VI has very large file sizes. Even if you're shooting in JPEG, I think the JPEGs are like 20 megabytes. Where on the iPhone, the photos are 2 or 3 megabytes. So they're like 10 times smaller. If you are looking for every single focal length in your pocket, the iPhone has you covered. On the iPhone, you have a 13mm lens, a 24mm lens, a 28, a 35, a 50 something, and a 120mm lens, all in this tiny little box. Whereas on the Fuji, you have a fixed 35mm lens. I mean, you can digitally crop now with the Fuji X100VI, and you get a 50mm and a 70mm, but if you're looking for something wider or just the entire kit of lenses that you may want, the iPhone has the upper hand. And if you're looking for the most powerful camera in the smallest package, then I don't think you can beat the iPhone. This thing is extremely small. It's insane how much is in this tiny little thing. The Fuji is really small, but you don't get all the lenses, you don't get all the dynamic range, and your Fuji can't receive emails. So overall, I am really impressed with the iPhone, especially with these new photographic styles. It's really nice to get pleasing images right out of phone without needing to edit them or slightly tweak them or having to shoot in RAW. I'm really impressed with the iPhone, but I think I would be even more impressed if I didn't see the photos that came from the iPhone right next to the ones from the Fuji X100VI. In my mind, the photos from the Fuji look more pleasing. The depth of field looks nice to me. The way it deals with skin and colors and tones looks more pleasing than the iPhone. But if I just saw the iPhone photos and didn't pixel peep between the two, I think the photographic styles and the iPhone would be a absolute winner for me. And one of the reasons I have the Fuji X100VI is because sometimes I just want separation from my phone. I don't want emails coming in when I'm taking photos. I don't want directions to pop up. I just want to wander around and take fun photos just for the sake of taking fun photos. And the separation between my digital life and taking photos is important to me. I've found when I try to go take photos on my phone, all of these notifications and distractions happen on the screen, and I feel more inclined to just take snapshots and not make photographs, if that makes sense. Again, really impressed with this phone, and if you're trying to decide between a dedicated camera for taking photographs or your phone, think about what you value, think about how important image quality and a viewfinder and being able to receive Uber notifications on your phone are at the same time. I'm sure you'll make the best decision for yourself, and I hope this video helped you with that. Anyways, my name's Davey. I'm gonna get out of here so I'm not blinded by this. Thanks for letting me spill the gravy, and we'll see you in the next video.